Welcome to a Well Done Professional podcast. I am excited today to have Tony Ehrbar. He is the owner and president of American Tent up in Green Bay. So welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, over the last few months, it's been a lot of fun getting to know you better and knowing more about your business, which is why I asked you to come on the podcast. And just been totally impressed by all the things you're doing, by your passion, your energy. And I just kind of feel like you're the consummate entrepreneur. So what I'd like you to do, kind of as a starting point, is share with our listeners a little bit about your story.
So my story, I started out as a chemist, and that was back at University of Wisconsin. Thought I wanted to, the career path for a chemist were to go sit in a research lab. And I got to the University of North Carolina and I called my dad and I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. Come get me. And he said, are you sure? I said, give me a day, I'll think about it. I called him back and that kind of threw me off of up till that point I was just planned out and I had everything all figured out in life. And so I took a year off and I got into business consulting. And really fell in love with business. Hadn't ever taken a business class in undergrad. And so I went to the University of Michigan to get my MBA. And that's where I met my lovely wife at the University of Michigan and continued on doing consulting, was all about consulting when I was at Michigan. And got out for the first 3 years and worked for Bain Consulting, which was a fantastic job. I learned a ton. I got to work in private equity. I got to work for a bunch of different companies, but I wasn't really seeing the fruits of my own labor. I was helping someone else with their own problems. And so I thought maybe that was a good time for a change. I went to work at United Airlines, and that was the most, hopefully no one from United Airlines is watching this, the most boring job that I had. I was in strategy for a $40 billion company that didn't make a lot of money. And so I was just herding cats. And I had a friend from business school who had bought a business off of Craigslist. And I remembered that, and I was watching Shark Tank one night, and I went on Craigslist, and there was a tent business for sale in my hometown of Green Bay. I was in Chicago at the time. And texted my brother-in-law and said, what do you think about buying a tent business? And he said, sure. And so he did the front end, and I did the back end for the business, and all I found myself thinking about was my own business. And so when the chance presented itself to buy the tent manufacturing portion of the business from the same owner, I jumped at it, jumped in the car from San Francisco at that point, drove back to Green Bay, and the rest is history. So we've owned this business since April of 2014.
That is an amazing story and shows a lot. It tells a lot about your courage and your willingness to kind of put yourself out there. Most people would think United Airlines was a good job, very solid, good company, right? So that's amazing that, and especially that you found it on Craigslist. I love that.
Yeah, I have, somehow things come to me on Craigslist. So worked out.
So one of the things that I think is maybe something that I'm admiring, and it isn't just because we've been doing some work together, but in this environment, in this economic environment where people are, a little more conservative, you've been really adding and changing up your leadership team. So talk to me a little bit about your foresight in doing that now versus waiting until the COVID scare, the COVID environment is a little more solid.
Yep. Yeah, and we've been lucky. The tent industry is one of the few that I found out is pandemic proof. There's a lot of people looking for covering outdoor spaces. Restaurants are looking to take a 200-seat restaurant that's now 50-seat restaurant and get it back to 100 seats by putting a tent outside. We've worked with nursing homes for visitation spots, bars, manufacturing facilities. So we've actually been growing during this time. And I read a book about 2 years ago called Traction. There's two books, Traction and Scaling Up, that are kind of the Bibles for small business growth. And in Traction, I think they really nail the people side of the business, right? I'm a classic visionary. I have lots of ideas, some of them good, some of them terrible. And when we first started the business up, I was kind of operating everything. And as I've started to add people onto the team, it's thinking about people who can help say no to those ideas, vet those ideas, and then go and execute on them.
So are you operating as a full EOS team? Because that's traction, obviously, on steroids, is taking the traction book and then putting the whole EOS system into your organization. Are you starting to do that?
We haven't implemented the full EOS system. We've done a hybrid version of it. So I like their people side. On scaling up, I like some of the bits and pieces of scaling up. And then we've been working with Cultivate Advisors, Kyle Wyrick. He's been helping us from kind of a small business advising perspective. And we've been working with a lean consultant that I met out at the University of Michigan, who's helped us out with the strategic planning portion of it. So we implemented SDP. It's a lean approach to doing strategic deployment. So it's kind of a hybrid version of the EOS model.
So one of the things that really struck me when we first started to get to know each other is I like to do some research on the company, and I thought your values and the fact that you hire to your values was unique, especially for someone as young an entrepreneur as you are, because most organizations, it takes a long time to figure out sort of the values piece. So what your website lists, you have an internal culture of respect, gratitude, and excellence, which is at the heart of all the things that you do. So as a leader, how do you bleed that into the organization? Because as we know, values are driven from the top down. They're driven into the organization. How do you demonstrate those to make sure your organization follows that?
I'm going to go back and reference another book that I love, which is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. The leader of an organization is the one who's responsible for determining what your why is. And obviously, we worked with the team to build those values, but you need to have a consistent message coming out from your seat. And he in his book describes it as a megaphone, right? So back here is the why, and then you have the how and the what. And you want to make sure you have good leaders in the how position that are helping take the ideas and the vision and the values and turning them into digestible messages for those on the front line who are kind of doing that what. So we as a team sat down at the end of last year and put the vision and mission, vision, and values down on paper. And yeah, one of the most important things for us is the people who work here. I love making tents, but I couldn't care what I made. I like the fact that we can impact people's lives here. So it's, my office staff always tells me they're not used to being at a job where someone treats them like an adult. Like someone comes in, they're like, hey, I need to leave early to pick up my kid. And I was like, you're an adult. That's fine. You're going to get your job done. I trust. Like, I don't track people's vacation because I know that they're going to take the right amount. I know I trust them. And so it's a level of trust in the organization, I guess, is kind of what it all boils down to.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you have so much passion, so much energy. You already said you're the visionary within the group. How do you find people because visionaries tend to have more ideas than they have time or money, right? You're always thinking of something else and you're always thinking of that next big thing. How do you surround yourself with people that can take your ideas and actually put them into action?
It's for me, a lot of the hires have been opportunistic. So as I started the business, I was kind of the CE everything. And as we slowly grew, there wasn't enough time in my day to do sales and market, all of those things. And so you hire a salesperson. One of my first hires was my dad. And so that was he retired, came over from 3M and worked in sales for me for a while. But then from there, a lot of it has been opportunistic. It's meeting people in the community. I've gone through Leadership Green Bay. And so finding people that I think would be a great fit for our organization, and then waiting until something kind of surfaces that would be a good fit for their skill set. And I think it's also being willing to see someone's skill set for what it is and not see what they did previously. So I'll take, for example, I had a guy who came to me. He was the CEO of the Bay Lakes Council for the Boy Scouts. And he had been working there for 25 years and was not willing to make another move with his family. His family, he was happy in the Hortonville area. And he applied for the EVP of operations role. And I said, I need someone straight out of the box for this EVP role. But I knew him from Leadership Green Bay previously, great guy. And I said, the things you did when you were in the Boy Scouts is training and development, it's leadership, and it's sales. And I said, so I would love, and we'd been kind of thinking about, we had a business development role. And so we hired him on as a business development, super friendly, super passionate guy, super outgoing. And then he's also leading up our internal training and development. So that's part of it. And then the other, when hiring for this EVP of operations role, that was the first role that I couldn't fulfill myself. I don't have a lean background. And so it was a super rigorous process, but it was mapping out. I took some personality assessments, a PI assessment, a PDP assessment, a few of those, mapping out who I am, and then trying to map who a good complement was to me, because that person is really the yin to my yang in this scenario. And so we had everyone who went through the process, or most of them, take an assessment, then a secondary assessment. And so that was the most rigorous process we've gone through. But the gentleman we hired said it was the most painful interview process he's gone through, but he said he knew the minute I called and said he had the job that he wanted to work here because he had met every last person in the organization. I think involving people in the decision-making process, everyone down to, in those interviews, we had our graphic designer who had started the previous day on the interviews. So there's the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's been a good reminder for me to make sure the team is involved in the process. And lots of times if I throw the idea out to the team, it'll always come back better than I would have done it myself.
Well, and it's interesting because we did an assessment early this year of our clients over the 24 years that we've been in business. And those that have grown despite the economy, good economy, bad economy, it didn't matter. They continued their growth path. The number one thing that came forward, what made them successful, is they didn't hire to resume, they hired to competency. So they met someone, they knew what the person is good at, and they either created a role or put them in a role that wouldn't be the obvious role to the outside person looking in. So I give you tremendous kudos for the fact that you're doing that, because ultimately, when we look at over the years that we've been in business, that's like the one secret of what they've done extremely well to grow despite anything that's going on in our world. So good job on that, for sure.
And I've made my own share of hiring mistakes as well. So I've learned, I used to view failing as I'm a failure. And that led to shame and pain and other things, and detaching those two words and saying, if I fail, it's an opportunity to learn, as opposed to I fail, thus for I must be a failure. So learning from those past mistakes and being able to course correct and do better the next time has been, I wouldn't say that was my forte in the first few years of being an entrepreneur, but it's something that I've learned. It's through, I'm going to go back to initiative one again. I have a mindfulness coach I work with and an executive coach I work with, Rod Bullhouse, who you know.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Brene Brown, if anyone listening is familiar, is wonderful for helping kind of teach how to break the bond between those things and get through some of those shame spirals that you can get into.
Mm-hmm. There's no question that being a good entrepreneurial leader, you have to have a lot of courage. And you have to face the good times and the bad times with the same amount of energy and vigor, for sure. So when you look at your career, Tony, up until this point, what is something that you're the most proud of?
I'd probably say it's building this business. So we had the tent rental business, and we opened up an event venue. And I was, to use a phrase that was given to me, I was half-assing two things, not whole-assing one thing. And so having the courage to sell out those businesses and focus on one, I defined my success by how much I did, not how well I did one thing. And so focusing in on this business is when we started to really see the growth take off and the team start to gel together.
That's great advice. So I think we always learn something, right? The longer you're in business, the more challenges, you learn something. So when you look back on your career, what would you say is the greatest learning? If you had people who you were going to give advice, you were going to be their executive coach, what would you tell them to not miss or not do, or to make sure and do in their career that you've learned kind of the hard way?
Yep. I just did a podcast with a guy. It's called What Not to Do is the name of his podcast. Hindsight is 2020. And it ties back to that detaching, failing from being a failure is the best advice I can give to someone. You're going to fail. It is, if you don't fail, there is something wrong. How you're scoring yourself, right? But if you don't fail, you don't learn. And so failure is an opportunity to learn. My mindfulness coach talks about seeing failure as an opportunity. And there's the idea of being resilient and being able to overcome what happened. And then there's the next step, which is being anti-fragile, which is basically right away turning any type of failure into a learning and an opportunity to better yourself. And the mindset switch that happened for me with regards to that was pretty huge. Because like I said, if you view it as a personal, it's your personal failure, and instead of saying I failed, you say I'm a failure. That leads to shame, right? If you say I failed, maybe you feel some guilt, maybe you feel some fear, but shame is a pretty terrible emotion. It can lead to a lot of you want to numb shame, and so that's where you lead to drinking or doing other things that are not productive.
Right. So one of the things, and I love this about you, is we would be in the middle of talking about a search or whatever we were working on, and then all of a sudden you'd say, nope, I got to be home with my kid. So, I mean, you took your share of time when everybody was working from home, which I love that. Not everybody has a fair divide. So talk to me about balance, because we know you're a dad, we know you're a husband. How are you finding balance with being an entrepreneur, trying to grow a company, and just all the magnitude of what that involves?
Yeah. It hasn't always been balanced. It's gotten a lot more balanced recently. I attribute a lot of that to setting goals. I wasn't ever a person to go through and set goals for myself at the beginning of the year. This is the first year that I've done it. I use Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner, and he has kind of a quarterly cadence to it. Every week you sit down and write out what your goals are. And it's writing down what the 10 most important things are for you for that year. And then it's also looking at the different areas of your life and where maybe there's some deficiencies. And so I saw a deficiency for myself in the work-life balance. And I'm a very achievement-driven person. That's just, it's been ingrained in me since I can remember. And it's a positive characteristic in most situations, but not everything. And work for me is something that I can achieve, and I can go out and talk to my sales guy, and it's, hey, we did this much sales, and that feels good, and you get that hit of dopamine, and that's awesome. But in addition to achievement-based goals, there's habit-based goals. And I always saw being a good dad and good husband as an achievement goal, and it's not. It's a habit-based goal. It's showing up with the energy and the presence, and making the time, establishing clear expectations with your team. And so as things slowly changed over time, I would send an email out to them and say, hey, my schedule for the next couple of weeks are going to look like this. I am available between these hours, however you need me. But when I'm with my daughter, if you really need me, call me or text me instead of sending an email. And so it's talking about modes of communication, knowing for your team, same thing. Like I know that different members of my team watch their kids in the morning at this point or in the afternoon. And so it's being aware of those things and just being open and honest and being flexible with everyone, and just getting your work done when it works around your schedule. Because for everyone here, family should come first. And in other jobs for myself, in other jobs for other people who work here, it wasn't always that way. And so I hope that's the most refreshing thing when someone walks in the door, that they notice. I had a guy who joined us from a company, I won't name the company, but he was working 60, 70-hour weeks, and he looked back at all the pictures from the past summer, him and his family, and he was in 2 of them. And that just dawned on him. He's like, that's unacceptable. And so he can now coach his kids' teams. He asked me if he could go on vacation last August, and I was like, like I said, you're an adult, go on vacation. Then he kept trying to check in during vacation. And I said, I'm going to fire you if you call me again on vacation. Go have fun with your family. And it's just, it had been ingrained in him for 10 years working in this company that you're always on and you always have to be answering and you can't be present. There's an equation that was given to me by my mindfulness coach. The quality of your output is equal to your energy times your presence times the importance now. And if any one of those things, if you don't show up with energy, if you're not being present, or if it's not the most important thing, you're not getting the best output possible. And so being able to be present is important.
Well, and I mean, just being honest, I think we all had a pretty big epiphany during COVID. And I said, in some respects, I think it's one of the best things that happened. Not that I want our world to have a pandemic, but even myself, I mean, I was working pretty easily 60 to 80 hours a week. And now I really do try to shut it off at night and spend time with my daughter and just enjoy life more than I did before, because I actually had time to do that. And I actually was cooking, which I hate to cook, but I actually was doing it. So a lot of new habits were formed, which is great. So we are at the 25-minute mark. A couple of quick questions. I don't want to give away any trade secrets, but because you are so entrepreneurial, what's in the future for American Tent? What can we expect to see out of you guys in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Yep. I just say continued growth. I have all the right people in the right seats. We have a leadership team meeting every week, and we had a meeting today, and I looked around the table and I might have teared up a little bit because I thought I have my dream team sitting at the table. So now we can just put our foot on the gas and head off in the right direction. We have a great manufacturing team. We work with the finance for hire. She came to us through an organization called Paro. I don't know how to say it. She's fantastic in helping us implement a new system, a new NetSuite ERP system. And then our sales team and marketing team are just rocking it. So I would say foot down on the gas, 100 miles an hour. And then all my passengers just tapping me on the shoulder, reminding me that there is a brake in the car.